Hello and welcome to the Disability Law Q&A with me, Martin Willemse. I'm a partner at the firm of Security American LLP and the Western Canada practice leader with all things related to disability and life insurance and critical illness. Please send your questions via social media platforms and I'll get to them as soon as they come through. One thing that I'm going to speak about today, which is something that always comes up, and I know I've spoken about this before, but every week, every single week, I field calls from people who have been denied disability benefits because their disability is resultant from a mental health illness that came about as a result of workplace bullying and harassment or a toxic work environment or being burnt out because of having too much work to do. Generally, it is due to toxic work environment or bullying and harassment. These cases are so often denied, and it always goes back to the policy. The wording of the policy, which is a contract, is key. When you have a disability claim, you have to prove that due to your illness or injury, but in this case, an illness, you are unable to perform the essential duties of your, and this is the key word, occupation, not job, occupation. How that is determined and assessed and interpreted by insurance companies in the regular scheme of things is, are you able or unable to perform the duties of your occupation? And the word occupation literally means the occupation that you have. Could you perform that in the general open labor market? Which in turn means not just for this employer, for any employer, even in a different location for the same employer. They're not looking at, are you unable to perform your job where you are in that location? They are looking at, are you unable to perform the duties of your occupation? And this continues, and I know it will continue to be an ongoing issue. The moment that there is workplace bullying and harassment in place, a person may say, okay, well, as a result of this, I now have a mental health illness, I have maybe depression, I may have anxiety, and as a result of that, I cannot work. It became so toxic at the workplace, or I was bullied to such an extent that I have an adjustment disorder, significant anxiety. The insurance company may then ask you, is your disability related to a workplace incident? You will say yes, because it happened as a result of your treatment, which was terrible at that workplace. The next question will be, okay, well, what about if that bully or that toxic workplace was no longer toxic or the bully was no longer there? Would you be able to then go back and perform the duties of your occupation? Often people would say, oh, yes, definitely. As long as I could go back to a harmonious workplace, I would be happy to go back. The moment you say that, your claim is denied. Why? It's denied because you are admitting by saying you can go back to work as long as that toxic workplace is not there, that you actually are not disabled within the meaning of the policy, because then it is a workplace issue. And those cases that get denied, the denial letters often say that we see this to be a workplace issue. Therefore, it falls outside of what the disability contract covers. Now, is that actually true? Can the person go back and work in that workplace if the bully or the workplace is no longer toxic? Not generally, because once the damage is done, the person needs to first recover. And often, when there are workplace harassment or bullying or toxic work environments in place, people who have responded very negatively to that often have a pre-existing mental health history, meaning that they may already be vulnerable to that type of toxic behavior due to whatever trauma they may have experienced before. Often, the workplace bullying and harassment is the final straw that broke the camel's back in the proverbial sense, that the person is now so compromised that yes, they may be able to one day go back to that workplace if the toxic workplace is no longer there, but they first need to get treatment to recover, to build resiliency so that they can get back to that workplace. I know that this is a difficult topic, and I know that people feel that they have to convince the insurance company how bad it was at that workplace so that they can get their claim approved. But that's not the situation. What you have to do is you have to prove that due to an illness, in this case a mental health illness, you have restrictions and limitations that will prevent you from performing your duties. I've had many cases like this. I'll use an example. A bank teller works at a bank, has changed locations because of significant trauma in their life that had happened previously. They get a new manager, so they're already compromised. The new manager is very difficult, targets them, bullies them, harasses them to the point that they completely break and cannot work, cannot leave the room, doesn't want to get out of bed, has panic attacks, needs significant treatment to deal with all the trauma that had happened prior that was never properly treated. Now, yes, there was workplace harassment, but why did the person go off work? Not just because of that, because that was the final straw. So when you speak to the insurance company due to workplace bullying and harassment that may have occurred, you want to make sure that you put everything in context. And when you do that, hopefully your claim will be approved. If your claim is not approved, please contact us and we can have a discussion with you as to what your options are. The insurance company usually will write you a letter explaining why the claim has been denied and what your options are. So as you see on the screen, to know more about your rights, you can go to disabilityrights.ca. Once you have the denial letter from the insurance company, it usually will detail an appeals process, and it should, towards the bottom of that screen or of the letter, advise you of something that is called a limitation period. A limitation period and an appeal period are entirely different things. With an appeal period, the person, sorry, just one second. With an appeal period, the person can engage with the insurance company by providing further information, meaning that you are engaging with the same entity that denied your claim. The limitation period is the timeline within which you can pursue a legal claim, which is what we do. A legal claim is something that is dealt with by a lawyer. You focus on your treatment, and our focus is to get you the best compensation through the legal claim. The limitation period to pursue a legal claim is generally 2 years. It depends on the province in which you are in, and you want to make sure when that 2-year timeline begins to run, because it runs regardless of an appeal. So if your claim is denied, there are a few things that you want to do. You want to contact an insurance lawyer, meaning Sanford American. We offer free consultations throughout Canada, other than in Quebec and the territories, and we review denial letters, policies, and medical records, so that when you speak with us, we can discuss with you our impressions as to why the claim was denied and what your options are, so you can make an informed decision as to how to manage your ongoing claim with the insurance company. Okay, I know some questions have come in. Question on YouTube from @LeeR3E8C. What evaluation is done at the 12-month mark if initially approved for LTD? Well, let's first say this. When you have a claim with an insurance company, they continuously adjudicate your claim. In other words, they continuously assess whether you continue to be disabled within the meaning of the policy. Most policies have something called a change of definition. Now, I'm speaking about group policies now. For most of them, the change of definition happens 2 years after LTD had been commenced. Others may be 1 year, others may be 3 years, others may include the waiting period in the 2-year timeline. Suffice to say, at some point, there is a change of definition, usually after 2 years. Then the definition changes from you have to prove that you cannot perform the duties of your own occupation to you have to prove that you cannot perform the duties of any other occupation for which you may have the transferable skills, and that would pay to you a certain amount of income, usually 2/3 of your pre-disability income, or the policy may detail a certain percentage. So in this case, I assume that the insurance company did do some form of assessment at 12 months. I've seen cases where the insurance company at the 12-month mark has already denied the claim a year in advance, deciding that the person is not totally disabled from working in another occupation. How they come to that conclusion is entirely beyond me, because a whole year still has to go by. You do not know where the person is going to be within those 12 months. But often it may also be that they're starting to look at the 12-month mark if it seems that your disability is ongoing, what your capacity is, what your education training experience would be, to decide whether you do have transferable skills that would allow you to work in another occupation once that definition changes. Now, remember, any occupation does not mean any occupation. Any occupation with the meaning of the policy, as I said earlier, would be something that you could do within your medical restrictions and limitations, that you could perform based on your transferable skill sets, in other words, your education, your training, and your experience, and that would pay to you a certain amount of income. If the policy is silent on the percentage, we usually default back to the common law position, which would be roughly 2/3 of the pre-disability income. So if the insurance company does a transferable skills analysis where they interview you or have somebody interview you regarding your education, your training experience, that person then turns around and writes a report and says, I think that based on the medical restrictions and limitations, this person can perform the duties of these various occupations. They do not need to find you a job. They're simply going to look at, are these occupations available in your province or the territory in which you live? And do you have the transferable skills to work in those? These are very arbitrary opinions. There may be a person who has some computer experience but was working as a laborer. Now the position is that they possibly could work in a sedentary occupation, and they're going to be looking at what experience do they have that would translate into the ability to work in a sedentary occupation. There often is an argument to make that even if they do have the transferable skills, that it would not pay them enough money, this occupation that the insurance company says that they can do, or that they actually don't have the transferable skills as the transferable skills analysis says they do, because their experience may be outdated. They need to be retrained. Or if they say to a person who used to work as in a very physical capacity, that they now have to go work in a seated capacity, in other words, in sedentary occupation, yes, they cannot do the job that they were doing before because it was so labor intensive. They have a bad back, but work in a sedentary occupation is the same issue because they cannot sit for extended periods of time. They may be taking pain medication that affects their cognition, and they have to change position throughout the day. So whenever a claim is denied, please do reach out to us and we can discuss those issues with you further. I hope that was helpful. Okay. Question on YouTube from Jason at JasonJ8246. I have agoraphobia with panic disorder. I'm doing exposure therapy with a support worker once every week for 40 minutes, every week for 2 months now. Is this a trap? Do they have grounds to cut me off? You know, when you have a mental health illness, often the treatment may be exposure therapy. So what you are doing, Jason, is you are engaging in the therapy that has been recommended. If you didn't do the therapy that had been recommended, they may be looking at that you are not doing what you're obligated to do. In other words, taking reasonable steps to recover from your illness. There's a mitigation argument. Mitigation means that you have to take reasonable steps to reduce the exposure to the other side, meaning the insurance company, meaning that you have to engage in proper treatment for your condition. You have to follow through with treatment advice. And if required, you could try and engage in retraining to qualify to work in another occupation, or return to work if you're capable of doing so. What you are doing, because of agoraphobia and panic disorder, you're doing exposure therapy that has been recommended. Now, you have to do that on a reasonable basis, as long as you do that in consultation with your treatment providers. If your condition worsens, obviously speak to them about it, but put things in context. Just because you're able, from the sounds of it, to do the 40 minutes every week, that does not translate to being able to go back to working in your occupation, one would think. I would always say, when a person is engaging in therapy or treatment or rehabilitation that is mandated by the insurance company or is paid by the insurance company, make sure that you see your doctor, your treatment providers on a very regular basis, so that if your condition were to worsen, or if you do have some improvement, that you put it in context. Because if the insurance company then turns around and denies your claim and you're not ready to go back to work, in conjunction with discussions with your treatment providers, you can go back and refer to the clinical records that your treatment providers would have made, speaking about a worsening of your condition or a non-improvement of your condition, so that you have ammunition to fight that denial, if there were to be one. Is it a trap? No, I don't think it's a trap. As long as you do what is reasonably required of you, and if it worsens your condition, speak to your treatment providers if they continue to support that you engage in that type of therapy. If they cut you off, do they have grounds? Based on what you've said to me, the little that I know, I would say no, they do not have grounds. Just because you're doing what you're required to do and you're engaging in recommended treatment, that does not mean that you have improvement. If they do cut you off, contact us. You'll see on the screen again, you can go to disabilityrights.ca and we can have a discussion with you as to what your options are. Okay. Question on YouTube from @Samantha-Chu. Do you find that there are certain conditions that insurers are less likely to cover? So, as an interesting way of phrasing the question, less likely to cover, meaning, but if you applied for insurance coverage, are there conditions that they may exclude? I don't think that's exactly what the question means, but remember, if you were to apply for individual coverage as a professional, or if you don't have coverage through your employer, now you want to go and apply for coverage, you have to probably disclose your history. The insurance company will then have their underwriting department assess your medical history to decide whether you are an acceptable risk that they will underwrite for disability coverage. In situations like that, they often may exclude certain conditions if you have a history of them, because they may see you as a higher risk that you may become disabled because of that again. Now, that's a whole different discussion. Because people often do get denied with individual policies or with mortgage insurance, where the insurer may turn around and say, well, you did not properly disclose your medical history. This also happens with life insurance. Therefore, we are now voiding the contract. In other words, they're not just turning down the claim, they're actually canceling your contract. If that happens, please also reach out to us so we can have a discussion and meaning a review of your records to see at what point did the insurance company decide to terminate your coverage, because there's a difference between having coverage for 2 years or more than 2 years. Less than 2 years, they have to prove that your misrepresentation was material. More than 2 years, they have to prove that it was fraudulent. So there's an argument to be made. The point is, if your coverage is terminated or if your claim is denied, do not let it sit. Contact us so we can have a discussion with you to see whether there is a claim to pursue, and you can decide how to do that. Those consultations are free. Going back to this question from Samantha, do you find that there are certain conditions that insurers are less likely to cover? If that means, are there conditions where insurance companies are less likely to approve payment of benefits or approve the disability claim? I would say this: the vast majority of cases that are submitted are due to mental health illnesses, which in turn means that the highest number of cases that are denied, in my experience, would be mental health cases as well. Often you will find that disability claims that are denied are due to what is referred to as subjective or invisible conditions. Those are the conditions where a person may have symptoms, restrictions, and limitations which can be profoundly disabling, yet there are no objective measures to provide the diagnosis. Sometimes the diagnosis is given by exclusion. It may be that a person has chronic fatigue syndrome, better known as myalgic encephalomyelitis, or they may have fibromyalgia, which is based on trigger points. There may be mental health disorders, agoraphobia, like we spoke about earlier, or PTSD, or anxiety, or depression, or bipolar. There are no magic tests to see what exactly the person has, but those conditions are often denied because the insurance company may be saying that, yes, this person may be reporting these conditions, but it's all based on self-report. There's no objective measure, which I really do have an issue with, because some policies, very, very few, mostly individual policies, exclude subjective conditions. Others do not. So if the insurer is prepared to accept premiums from you, but they're not excluding these conditions, yet when you submit a claim, they say, well, there's no objective evidence. That is infuriating, especially if your doctors are supporting that you cannot work. Your doctors have the benefit of having treated you for an ongoing period of time, meaning that they've had a long time or long enough period where they've made independent observations as to how you present to them, and they can make comments and give an assessment as to whether they believe you're disabled or not. take a mental health disorder, if the person comes into the doctor's office, is crying, is suicidal, has panic attacks, has a low affect, doesn't make eye contact, just you can obviously see as a doctor, as a medical professional, what the person is presenting as, and then give an opinion. So in those cases are denied, disregarding what the doctors are saying. Those ones are often ones that we do take on as well, and we help our clients get the best compensation through legal claims. Anyway, I will move on. At Aileen-TV9 says, my mother started selling some of her crochet to donate to charity. She's off on LTD. She mentioned doing this and they've started to ask a lot of questions. What should she do? She should continue to report to her doctors her ongoing restrictions and limitations. Selling crochet to donate to charity may mean, in the insurance company's view, the capacity of doing the crochet. That is an issue. The capacity of performing a duty shows function. So they may be asking questions as, if you're selling it off to donate to charity, that means even if you're donating, that there may be a form of income being generated. If she decided not to sell it or not to donate it to charity, because that's her decision as to what she's doing, they're going to be looking at how much money is she making from that? How much time is she putting in to sell that crochet? So they may be looking at this in terms of function, and they're going to be looking at, does that function correlate or translate into a capacity to return to her workplace or potentially to go work in another occupation as well. Make sure that she continues to report to her doctors about ongoing restrictions and limitations. And I mean, she's already told the insurance company about this. Just put things in context. Being able to do crochet, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can go back to work in another occupation or in her own occupation. Lots of cases like this, they would have to look at what the person's restrictions and limitations are, what their income level is, and what, if they're doing anything like this, what they're able to earn. If the claim is denied, again, please have a reach out to us. Jason J3818 says, I'm on LTD. What can I do to stop occupational therapists from forcing me to go back to work? This is a difficult question, and the question has to be answered in this way. Make sure that you report to your doctors your restrictions and limitations. As I said earlier, if you are engaged in a approved rehabilitation program with an insurance company, and they're having you work with an occupational therapist, and the occupational therapist is saying to you that you have to now go back to work, or we feel that you're ready to go back to work. It may not be the occupational therapist, it probably will be the insurance company working with the occupational therapist. It is crucial that during that period of time, when you are engaged in the rehabilitation program, that you continue to see your doctor on a very regular basis and report to your doctor whether you have a worsening of your claim or of your condition, or whether you have ongoing restrictions and limitations as a result of your treatment. If it's worsening or if it is not getting better, make sure that your doctor records that so that if the insurance company denies your claim, that you have that on record. If your concern is that you're dealing with the occupational therapist is pushing you and it is worsening your condition, have your doctor write a letter to the insurance company explaining how this is impacting you and possibly saying that you should not any longer engage in this form of rehabilitation. I'm not saying that the doctor has to say that because I'm not a medical professional, but if that is a concern that the doctor may have, that this is not improving you and that it's actually harming you, then having the doctor write such a letter will hopefully assist. If they do deny you and you're not ready to go back to work, reach out to us and we can discuss with you what your options are so you can make an informed opinion how to proceed. You can go to disabilityrights.ca for more information, as you can see on the screen. Question on Reddit from Day, D-A-E. I noticed someone parked outside my house taking photos. I think my LTD insurer hired a private investigator. Is that allowed? What should I do if I suspect surveillance? In the bigger sense, yes, surveillance is allowed. Do insurance companies engage in that conduct? Yes, they do. What they cannot do is they cannot bug your phone, they cannot hack your email, they cannot do things like that. But do they follow people around? Yes, they do. Or hire investigators at least to follow people around. Yes, I've seen that happen. Often, and this is something to be aware of, if the insurance company has been paying you benefits for a period of time, and then they send you logs to complete, activity logs, say maybe for the next 3 weeks, they want you to complete a log as to what it is that you're doing every day, every hour. That very likely will mean that they are going to have a surveillance done by an investigator, because they will likely then look at what did you complete on those logs to indicate what your activity was, and they're going to compare it to what the observations were made through the surveillance. For example, and I've seen people denied on this basis as well. You may forget to complete certain things, but then they have you driving your children to school, stopping at Tim Hortons, stopping at Home Depot, coming home, taking out the garbage. If you don't say things like that, they're going to turn around and say, well, we feel that what you reported your restrictions and limitations to be are not consistent with what we were able to observe through the surveillance. Therefore, there's a credibility issue. Therefore, we believe that you have malfunction. Therefore, we will deny your claim. It's good that you've noticed, Day, that this is happening. I would never say to anybody, pretend that you have restrictions and limitations, as long as you are honest with the insurance company as to what your limitations and restrictions are, and that you make sure that you continue to report to your doctors what your restrictions and limitations are. You should not have anything to hide, and you shouldn't have anything to worry about. Continue to do that. If you feel that the surveillance is invading your privacy, or if you have a mental health disorder and it is triggering that, you can report it to the police as well. A question from Sammy on Facebook. What is the difference between short-term and long-term disability? This is a very good question. How much time do we have? We've got another 3 minutes. Okay. Short-term disability, number one, not everybody has short-term disability. Short-term disability, you find it in the title. It is disability benefits or disability coverage that is approved for a certain period of time. If you have it through your employment, often it may be 4 months, it may be 6 months, or it may even be a year. Generally, it's 4 months. Short-term disability usually is adjudicated by an insurance company. In other words, there would be an insurer who makes a decision on the claim after having assessed all the documentation. But often, short-term is self-funded by the employer, meaning that it is the employer who pays short-term, but it is the insurance company who makes decisions on the short-term. In some instances, it is the insurance company who also pays the benefit. In other words, they are insuring and they've got the legal and financial liability to pay that benefit. Short-term, again, limited for a short period of time. Generally, it has the same definition that you have to prove you cannot perform the duties of your own occupation or your regular occupation. Long-term is the period that follows short-term. So if you were able to get your short-term approved, in other words, maybe for the first 4 months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, then it transitions to long-term disability. Then, let's speak about this in a general sense. If you have long-term through your employer, in other words, you've got coverage as a benefit through your employment, it may be the same insurance company who adjudicates whether you are disabled into the long-term disability phase, or it may be a different insurance company. The point is, there is a transition from short-term to long-term. Long-term for the own occupation phase likely will have the same definition as the short-term, and then at some point there's going to be a change of definition, as I was explaining earlier. The change of definition would be it changes from you having to prove you cannot perform the duties of your own occupation to now having to prove that you cannot perform the duties of any other occupation that you could perform within your restrictions and limitations, and that would pay to you a certain amount of income, as I was saying earlier when we started. People are often denied at this juncture. So the insurance company may send you for an independent medical examination, or they may simply have one of their doctors in-house review whether you are, in their opinion, unable to work in another occupation. And those opinions are often rendered without them having seen you, assessed you, or even spoken with you. They only review clinical records, yet they feel that they can give an opinion that overrules your treatment provider's opinions. Again, another reason to speak to a lawyer if your claim is denied, because these are all factors that are taken into consideration as to whether you can pursue a legal claim or what other option you would choose to exercise. We generally assist people on that basis, as I said, through legal claims. Go to disabilityrights.ca for more information. And if you do have a question, please reach out to our intake team and we can offer you a free consultation. Sometimes we cannot do that if the person is unionized, but not all unionized cases. Anyway, thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for all the questions. Our next session is going to be an employment law Q&A on Thursday, December 11th, 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So that would be what? 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.